I paid off my son's debt, then learned. He bet on my funeral. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, thin and unmarked except for my name typed across the front in sans serif font. No return address. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter with my coffee still steaming beside me, and inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a betting slip. The date was 4 days old. The wager was for $12,000. The proposition read, David Marsh expires before December 31st of this year. David Marsh is my name. Below that, in handwriting I had known since it first formed crooked letters on refrigerator drawings, was a signature, my son's signature, and beside it, stamped in red ink, the word active. I set the paper down and looked out the window at the birch trees losing their leaves in the yard. My hands were steady. I'd been a high school principal for 32 years before I retired, and I learned early that the first response to crisis is silence. Let the information settle. Let the edges sharpen. Then decide. But I will tell you that something inside me went still in a way I had never felt before. 3 weeks earlier, I had written a check for $47,000 to clear my son's gambling debts. He had come to me late on a Sunday night, pale and stumbling over his words, and told me he owed money to people who do not forgive lateness. He said he had made mistakes. He said he was done. He looked at me with eyes that still carried some version of the boy who used to build model airplanes at this same kitchen table, and I believed him because I wanted to. I did not ask many questions. I told him I would handle it, and I did. I liquidated part of an investment account I had been saving for decades and paid the debt in full through a lawyer I trusted. I made my son promise he would never gamble again. He promised. He hugged me. He thanked me. He left my house that night with his shoulders a little straighter, and I felt the particular weight of fatherhood that comes when you shield your child from consequences you know they earned. Now I stood in my kitchen holding a piece of paper that told me he had gone back within days, not to win, not to escape, but to wager on my death. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Then I finished my coffee. I'm 68 years old. My wife died 7 years ago after a short and brutal illness that gave us no time to prepare. Since then, I've lived alone in the house we bought when our son was still in elementary school. The mortgage is paid, the gutters are clean. I wake at 6 every morning and walk 3 miles through the neighborhood before most people have opened their curtains. I do not live a dramatic life. I read. I volunteer at the library. I see my son for dinner once a month, though he usually cancels half the time. I thought I knew him. I have spent enough years watching young people lie to recognize the signs, the quick explanations, the shift in eye contact, the need to fill silence. My son had done all of that when he came to me about the debt, but I had attributed it to shame. Now I wondered what else I had missed. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. I am not a man who rushes into confrontation. My wife used to joke that I could wait out a glacier, so I began where I always begin when I need clarity. I started gathering information. The betting slip had no company name, but the layout was professional, watermarked, serialized in the corner with a 7-digit code. I took a photograph of it and sent it to a former colleague who had a son working in financial fraud investigation. I did not explain why I needed help. I simply asked if he could identify the source. He wrote back within 2 hours. The slip came from an offshore betting syndicate that operated through encrypted referrals. High stakes, mostly wealthy clients, entirely illegal in this country, but nearly impossible to prosecute. The odds listed on my son's bet were even money, 50-50. He stood to win $12,000 if I died before the end of the year. If I lived, he lost $12,000. I tried to imagine the moment he placed that bet. I tried to picture him sitting in front of a screen or talking to some faceless broker and saying, "Yes, I will wager on my father's death." I tried to understand what kind of logic or desperation leads a man to that point, but I could not. So I stopped trying and focused on what I could control. I made a list. First, I needed to know if this was an isolated incident or part of a broader pattern. Second, I needed to understand his financial situation in full, not the edited version he had given me. Third, I needed to protect myself. And fourth, I needed to decide what kind of father I was going to be in the face of this. The last point was the hardest. I have always believed that love is not unconditional. That is a pretty lie people tell themselves. Love requires respect. It requires basic decency. And when those things are gone, love becomes something else. Obligation, maybe. Habit. But not love. Still, he was my son. I called my lawyer the next morning and scheduled an appointment. His name is Roger, and he has managed my estate planning since my wife passed. I told him I needed to make changes. He did not ask why. We met that Thursday in his office downtown, and I walked him through what I wanted. I was removing my son as the primary beneficiary of my will. Everything would now go into a trust managed by Roger, with instructions to distribute funds only for specific purposes like education or medical expenses. My son would receive nothing directly. If I died under unusual circumstances, a portion of the estate would fund a private investigation before any distribution occurred. Roger took notes without expression. When I finished, he looked at me over his reading glasses and asked if I was sure. I said I was. He drafted the documents, and I signed them. The following Monday, the new will was filed and notarized by the end of the week. That was step 1. Step 2 required more patience. I needed access to my son's financial records, which I did not have and could not legally demand. But I knew some things. I knew he banked at the same credit union I had used for 40 years because I had set up his first account there when he was 16. I knew he had never been good at paperwork and probably had not changed his security questions since college, and I knew that desperation makes people careless. I started small. I went to the credit union in person and spoke with a teller I had known for a decade. I told her I was worried about my son and wanted to make sure he was managing his finances responsibly. She was sympathetic but professional. She could not give me account details without his permission. I thanked her and left, but I had planted a seed. 2 days later, I called my son. I kept my voice easy and warm. I told him I had been thinking about the debt I paid off and wanted to make sure he was staying on track. He assured me he was. I asked if he had considered financial counseling. He said he had it under control. I told him I loved him, and he said he loved me too. Then I asked, casually, if he had updated his banking passwords recently, because I had read an article about security breaches. He laughed and said he probably should. I agreed and let the conversation drift toward other things. It was a small test, and he failed it. That night, I tried logging into his credit union account using the email address I knew he used and the password reset option. The security question was the name of his first pet. I knew the answer. We had adopted a beagle named Scout when my son was 9, and he had loved that dog more than anything. I typed Scout, and the system let me reset his password. I sat there for a long moment before I clicked through. I knew what I was doing was legally questionable. I knew it violated his privacy. But I also knew that he had bet on my death, and I needed to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. His account balance was negative $800. There were overdraft fees stacked on overdraft fees. But what caught my attention were the recurring transfers. Every week, $500 moved out of his checking account into an external account I did not recognize. I traced the routing number through a public database and found it connected to a payment processor used by online betting platforms. He had not stopped. He had simply gotten better at hiding it. I scrolled back through 3 months of transactions. Payments to the same processor appeared over and over, sometimes multiple times a week. Amounts varied, but the pattern was consistent. He was gambling constantly and losing. The $47,000 I had paid to clear his debt had not saved him. It had just reset the clock. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood settling. I thought about the years I had spent trying to raise him correctly, the lessons about responsibility and integrity, the conversations about consequences. My wife and I had done our best, but somewhere along the way something had gone wrong. Or maybe it had been wrong all along, and we simply had not seen it. I wondered if he had planned this, if he had come to me with his sob story knowing I would pay, knowing it would buy him time to place more bets. And then I wondered if the bet on my life had been opportunistic or calculated, if someone had suggested it to him or if he had thought of it himself. The envelope with the betting slip had no note, no explanation. Someone had sent it to me, and I did not know who or why. A warning, maybe. Or a cruelty. Either way, it meant someone else knew what my son had done. That thought kept me awake. The next morning, I drove to the address listed on my son's checks. He rented a duplex on the east side of town in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. The paint was peeling on the front steps and the lawn was mostly weeds. His car was parked in the driveway, a sedan with a dented bumper and an expired registration sticker. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again and waited. After a minute, I heard movement inside, and the door opened part way. My son stood there in sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, looking like he had just woken up. His eyes went wide when he saw me. "Dad," he said, "what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you," I said. "Can I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped aside. The interior of the duplex was dim and smelled faintly of old food. The furniture was minimal. A couch with a blanket thrown over it, a television on a folding table, empty takeout containers stacked beside the sink. I stood in the center of the room and looked around without comment. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just busy." "With what?" "Work stuff." "Where are you working now?" He had told me a month ago that he was doing freelance graphic design. I had not pressed for details. "Still freelancing," he said. "It's going fine." I nodded slowly. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope. I set it on the coffee table between us and watched his face. The color drained from his skin. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He did not pick it up. "Do you want to explain this?" I asked. He stared at the envelope like it might burn him. "I don't know what that is." "Yes, you do." His jaw tightened. He looked away, then back at me. "Where did you get that?" "It was mailed to me, anonymously." "Someone's messing with you," he said quickly. "That's not real. It has your signature. It's fake." I let the silence stretch. He shifted his weight. His hands went into his pockets, then came back out. He was sweating. "You bet $12,000 on my death," I said. 4 days after I paid off your debt." "Dad, listen." "I am listening." He ran a hand through his hair. His voice went higher. "It's not what you think. It's complicated." "Explain it to me." "I can't." "Try." He looked at the floor. "I owed someone. Not the same people as before. Someone else. They said they would forgive part of the debt if I placed a bet for them. It was their idea. I'm just the name on the slip. I don't actually want you to—" He stopped. His face crumpled. He sat down on the couch and put his head in his hands. "I'm so messed up," he said. "I don't know how to stop." I stood very still. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to sit down beside him and tell him we would figure it out together. But I'd done that already, and here we were. "Who sent me the slip?" I asked. "I don't know." "You don't know, or you won't say." "I don't know." "Who did you place the bet for?" He shook his head. "I can't tell you. If I tell you, it gets worse. Worse than betting on your father's death?" He looked up at me with red eyes. "Yes." I picked up the envelope and put it back in my pocket. "I changed my will," I said. "You're not getting anything when I die. Not a dollar. Everything goes into a trust that you cannot touch." His face went blank. "What?" "I'm not financing your addiction, and I'm not going to let you profit from my death." "Dad, you can't." "I already did." He stood up fast, his fists clenched at his sides. "You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly. These people don't care about wills. If you mess this up, they'll come after you." "Let them." He stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe we both were. "Get out," he said. "Excuse me." "Get out of my house." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I turned and walked to the door. Before I left, I stopped and looked back. "I loved you," I said. "I still do, but I will not be a part of this." He did not respond. I closed the door behind me and walked back to my car. My hands were shaking by the time I turned the ignition. I drove home and sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. That conversation should have been the end of it. I had drawn my line. I had protected my assets. I had said what needed to be said. But 2 days later, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. I answered, and a man's voice said, "Mr. Marsh?" "Yes." "You need to undo what you did with your will." I went very still. Who is this? A concerned party. Your son has obligations. Those obligations are tied to certain expectations. If you interfere, it creates problems. I have no idea what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Undo the will. Put your son back as the beneficiary. Do it by the end of the week, or we will have to reconsider our timeline. The call ended. I sat there with the phone still against my ear. Then I set it down and called Roger. He answered on the second ring, and I told him what had just happened. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "We needed to involve the police." I agreed. By that evening, I was sitting in a conference room at the precinct with a detective named Alvarez. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, and she listened without interrupting while I laid out everything: the debt, the betting slip, the phone call. She took notes and asked a few clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This is a lot," she said. "I know. The betting slip is evidence of illegal gambling, but it's hard to prosecute without more context. The phone call is a threat which we can investigate, but the caller was likely using a burner or a spoofed number. Your son is involved with people who know how to stay invisible." "What do I do?" "Stay visible," she said. "Don't change your routine. Don't isolate yourself. If they're trying to intimidate you, they want you scared and alone. Don't give them that." "And my son?" She looked at me with something close to sympathy. "That's harder. He's an adult. We can't make him cooperate, but if he's in danger or if he's participating in criminal activity, he needs to come forward." "He won't." "Then we work around him." She assigned an officer to increase patrols near my house and gave me a direct number to call if I received any more threats. I thanked her and drove home as the sun was setting. That night I did not sleep much. Every sound outside felt amplified. I kept my phone on the nightstand and checked the locks twice before I went to bed. It was a strange thing, being afraid in my own home. I'd lived here for 30 years. I knew every creak in the floorboards and every shadow the streetlights cast through the curtains, but now it all felt different. The next morning, I forced myself to follow Detective Alvarez's advice. I went for my walk. I stopped at the coffee shop on Main Street and bought a newspaper. I waved to neighbors. I acted like everything was normal. And maybe that was the cruelest part of all of this, pretending that the world had not shifted when it very clearly had. 3 days later, I received another envelope. Same type, same lack of return address. Inside was a photograph. It was my son standing outside a warehouse I did not recognize. He was talking to 2 men in dark jackets. The angle suggested it had been taken from a distance, maybe from a car. The back of the photo had a single word written in marker: compliance. I showed it to Detective Alvarez. She took it as evidence and said her team would try to identify the location. But she also told me what I already suspected. Someone was watching my son. And by extension, someone was watching me. "They're trying to scare you into changing the will," she said. "Don't. I won't." "Good. Because the moment you do, you lose leverage." I had not thought of it that way, but she was right. The will was the only thing keeping me alive. If they thought I was worth more dead than alive, the threat would escalate. But if my death gained them nothing, they had no reason to act. It was a cold equation, but it held. I went home and made myself dinner. I ate slowly and listened to the radio. I tried to remember what my life had felt like before all of this, but the memory felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else. That weekend, I did something I had not done in years. I called my wife's sister. Her name is Margaret, and she lives 2 states away. We had not spoken much since the funeral, mostly because grief makes people retreat, and neither of us had known how to bridge the gap. But I needed to talk to someone who had known my son when he was still a child, someone who might help me understand. She answered on the 3rd ring, and her voice was cautious. "David?" "Hi, Margaret. Is everything okay?" "Not really. Can we talk?" We talked for over an hour. I did not tell her about the bet or the threats. I simply asked her what she remembered about my son growing up. She was quiet for a while, and then she said something I had not expected. "He was always looking for shortcuts," she said, "even when he was little. He wanted the reward without the work. You and Susan tried so hard to teach him differently, but I think some people are just wired that way." You think it's inherent? I think some of it is, but I also think the world enabled him. He was charming. People let him slide. I let him slide. You loved him. That's different. Is it? She did not answer right away. Then she said, "You did your best. That's all anyone can do." I thanked her and hung up. Her words sat with me. I wanted to believe I had done my best, but I also knew that love without boundaries is not kindness. It is permission. The following Tuesday, Detective Alvarez called me. They had identified the warehouse in the photograph. It was part of a commercial property tied to a shell company linked to organized gambling operations. They were building a case, but it would take time. She asked if I had received any more threats. I told her no. She said that was a good sign. Maybe they were backing off. I wanted to believe her, but I knew better. That night my son called. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Dad," he said. His voice was small. "Yes." "I need your help. I can't give you money. I don't want money. I need you to meet me tonight. There's something you need to see." "What is it?" "I can't explain over the phone. Please, just come." He gave me an address, a park near the river. I told him I would think about it and hung up. Then I called Detective Alvarez and told her what he had said. She told me not to go. It was too risky. I agreed, but an hour later I was driving toward the park. I parked near the entrance and walked down the path toward the benches by the water. The park was empty except for a figure sitting on the far bench. My son. He stood when he saw me, and even from a distance I could see he was shaking. I stopped a few feet away. "What is this about?" He reached into his jacket and I tensed, but he pulled out a folder. He handed it to me. "These are the people I owe," he said. "Everything I know, names, numbers, locations. I've been keeping records. I didn't know what else to do." I opened the folder. Inside were printed screenshots, handwritten notes, transaction records. It was meticulous, organized, the work of someone who had been planning. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "Because I can't get out on my own, and I can't let you get hurt because of me." I looked at him. His eyes were clear. For the first time in weeks, he looked like he meant what he said. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it, for the bet, for lying, for everything." I folded the folder and held it against my chest. "Are you in danger right now?" "Yes." "Then we go to the police, together." He nodded. We walked back to my car, and I drove us both to the precinct. Detective Alvarez met us there, and my son spent the next 3 hours giving a statement. The folder became evidence. Alvarez told us it was enough to start building a case against the syndicate, but it would take time, and my son would need to stay somewhere safe. I offered my house. She agreed, with conditions. Increased patrols, check-ins, no contact with anyone from his previous life. That night, my son slept in his old bedroom for the first time in years. I sat downstairs with a cup of tea and thought about the long road ahead, the legal battles, the testimony, the uncertainty. But I also thought about the fact that he had come back, that he had chosen to stop running. It was not redemption, not yet, but it was something. Over the following weeks, the case moved forward. Arrests were made. The syndicate's operations were disrupted. My son cooperated fully, and in exchange, he was offered a deal that kept him out of prison. He would testify. He would enter a program for gambling addiction. He would rebuild. I changed my will again, not back to the way it was, but to something new, a structure that supported recovery but did not enable relapse. The bet on my life was voided when the syndicate collapsed. I never found out who sent me that first envelope, but I suspect it was someone inside who wanted out and saw me as a lever. I turned 69 in March. My son was there. We had dinner. We did not talk about the past. We talked about the future. Small things, manageable things. He is still my son. That has not changed, but I am no longer the father who saves him from every consequence. I am the father who holds the line, who loves him enough to let him fail, and who will be there when he chooses to stand back up. That is all I can do. And some days, it is enough.